Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. This is Mike Steckline, partner at the Institute for Enterprise Excellence. This is a webinar today that we attempted to host last month. We had some technical issues, but our two presenters, Denise and Sid, stuck with it, and we're able to put forth the presentation that they're going to provide for us today. A few housekeeping details as we normally do. We've got the phones muted. But we will have some Q&A time at the end. You can always put a question out there in the chat function if you'd like to have either of our speakers speak to a question. The record button has been put in play, so this webinar will be available for your use as well as the use of others that would benefit from the content of the webinar. So this is the fourth in a series of webinars that started with a question from Garrett Bean. Was with Garrett last week and his colleagues out in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And at the time, several months ago, Garrett had a question about having a webinar to really go beyond what we talk about in our white papers and talk about, so what does this really look like as you're trying to move into more of a principle-based approach? And Garrett stepped forward and was one of the presenters of the first webinar in the series, and we've had several others in the past, and this one is the fourth one to talk about what this might really look like as people are trying to have this make sense and going beyond the use of tools and trying to continuously improve their work toward their purpose. So just some overall background information. Our general advice, and this again is a general scheme that we concocted. It's described in a white paper that you can go to the bit.ly link at the top and read about it. But when we think about if people are serious about doing this and want to try to make it happen, thinking in terms of swim lanes, our general advice, again, this is very general, talks about after some initial learning, moving into experimentation, followed by some integration, and then some expansion, which doesn't always work linearly. You might find yourself making some steps back, but in a general sense, we found this to be pretty useful. Our recommendation is that management be involved early on in thinking about what does this really mean as far as the principles, what kinds of behaviors do they need to start modeling, what kinds of conversations do they need to have as they're learning about this. And typically there's an internal advising or support team that is also learning alongside, and they may have good knowledge about how this works. They may be experienced in traditional lean or other continuous improvement, but taking a principle-based approach might be new to them. So they're learning alongside as well in many of our applications. And then at a point in time, not in the beginning, but at a point in time, there's the commitment to move forward with a few model areas to really experiment with this and thinking about what might this look like for our organization. So on this slide, I basically focus on, it starts with learning these principles and the new roles that people have, the 1, 2, 3 that I mentioned on the previous slide, followed by a 4, which is the number 4 is the design of simple systems, leadership developing simple systems for themselves. Could be going to Gemba, could be rounding, could be the beginnings of leader standard work. And then really experimenting with those simple systems. And then you see it connects down to where those model areas are working. This is an example from another organization, also from New Mexico, and I was with them last week as well, learning about the great work that they're doing to update this. And this is an example about, in interaction with them, how we would give perspective on how they're moving forward with the transformation and where the areas of focus might be for their transformation work. So helping them move their roadmap forward. Now, some people may say, well, that sounds all great, Mike, but what if I don't have, say, top management isn't interested in this, or I don't necessarily have control over everything in an organization? And I think about this framework as working no matter where you are in the organization. You're a leader of something, so thinking about putting yourself in this swim lane, what advice do you have access to that might give you some ideas about what you can do? And thinking in terms of safe-to-fail experiments that you can try, knowing that there are areas outside of the experiment that are going to be curious about what you're doing and watching. And this could be your colleagues, your peers, but also thinking up to the macro system, keeping your boss and their peers apprised of this experiment that you're running to try to think about a more sustainable way to move continuous improvement forward. Now, we're not alone in this sort of a thinking. Peter Schultes wrote a couple nice books, and there's a bit.ly link to a concept that he calls the onion patch strategy. And then a gentleman that worked closely with Toyota, his last name is Mayo, talked about the clamshell strategy. So this idea of working wherever you're at and moving from there is not a new one, and it's something that we think this general framework does still work. So with that, I want to turn it over to, first of all, Sid from the Mayo Clinic Health System, Healthcare. And Sid, I'm just going to have you do your introduction and talk about who you are and what you've been doing so that you can make the full use of your time.
Sure. Thank you, Mike. Yeah. So first of all, I would like to thank Mike for this wonderful opportunity. It's been we've worked with Mike quite a bit, as just like many of you here, and so yeah, really thankful for being able to share our journey. So like Mike said, I'm Sid Srinivasan. Sid, I go by Sid. I worked as a lean specialist, a health systems engineer, a continuous improvement role at Mayo Clinic Health System and Franciscan Healthcare. I'll talk a little bit about that, but let me just talk. So the rest of the presentation, this is sort of what I have in the agenda. I'll just talk a little bit about who we are here at the Mayo Clinic Health System. I'll talk about our journey, some of our experiments, our learnings from our experiments, and then my personal final thoughts and of just my involvement in this entire journey. So as I go through this webinar, I'll present the experiments and the learnings chronologically, starting with what we started first and where we are right now. So who we are at a glance. So Mayo Clinic Health System is the community division of the Mayo Clinic as a whole. And we are located in the Midwest of the country. We serve 72 communities in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Iowa. We're located in 60 different locations, and we have over 1,000 providers in the health system. It's really separated into or divided into 4 different regions. Franciscan Healthcare is the Southwest Wisconsin region, and that's where we are located, with La Crosse as the hub for that Southwest Wisconsin region there. So our framework, I would like to break it down into 2 sort of major cycles. Of course, we have been trying to use the PDSA approach for our experiments with 2 major cycles and several smaller cycles that have embedded throughout our journey. Our plan's always been moving towards the system-based improvement approach, with a lot of focus on education through workshops, conferences, and then sort of learning from that education and conferences every time we developed our body of knowledge through the different roles within the organization. We did a lot of teaching and experimentation through model cells, and our second round was focusing on purpose. And then really out of all of those experiments was just understanding what behaviors were developed. And of course, we wanted some results as well. And the ACT part of it was, for the first round, learning about system builds and spreading the model cells. And then for the second round, really, how can we make sure that we have lasting results and a renewed focus on behaviors, I would say. So this slide shows the last 10 years, if not, well, 12 years of improvement journey at the Franciscan Healthcare there. We have, again, broken it down to 2 different time periods. The first time period is from 2007 to 2014. We call it the mile-wide, inch-deep approach, where we tried to teach, implement new learning throughout the entire organization, but just at the leadership level, department leadership level, or our past CEO would call it applying peanut butter on a slice of bread. So the entire slice of bread is getting some exposure and some knowledge, but it's sort of very minimal. So just like I imagine most other organizations, we started with a lot of lean tools, your 5S, a lot of Kaizens. We went crazy with creating just a lot of standard work and even a few structured A3 problem solving. And then in 2013, 2014, we sort of realized that it's not just tools, there's a structured approach to it, and we learned about the lean management system. And then the outcome of that was sort of focused 5-day workshops for leaders. We had 200 leaders and go through this 5-day workshop where they learned a lot about the tools, of course, but also a little bit more structure around how do they use these tools and implement these tools. But it was just those 5 days of workshop, and then we kind of stepped back. So as you can imagine, the outcome of that was some department leaders really resonated with the learning. They took that learning and then just ran with it. But again, maybe not a whole lot more beyond that. So then in 2015, that's where we sort of discovered Shingo and the whole system-based, principle-based architecture. And then we learned the importance of model cells. So really that's where I would call it our transformation 1.0 experiment. So we sort of embedded a lot of these learning, and we went with 3 rounds of model cells. And I'll cover these model cells in a little bit more detail later on. And then from 2017, we expanded on that. We focused on system builds. We built a bunch of different systems. And we also had our, what I would call 2.0, where a focus was purpose and understanding the importance of purpose with all of our work. So yeah, we would call this the inch-wide, mile-deep approach, where again we leveraged the concept of model cells, and we made sure that with each of those model cells, we made that vertical connection all the way from the senior leadership down to the front line. Again, mile-deep sort of approach there. So kind of stepping back, we had a lot of discovery, a lot of education and training over the years. Our first one, like I highlighted, was about the lean management system. Again, it's not just tools. I think that was our first sort of exposure to the understanding of what a system is and how the tools are not just discrete levers that you just pull or you're rather pushed up upon that you need to implement. So that was our first sort of understanding around all of this. And then the really big key part, and Mike alluded to this earlier, was senior leadership buy-in. And this is absolutely very, very important. So we sort of accomplished that by making all of our senior leadership attend a lot of workshops, seminars, conferences. Another huge sort of help was getting our leaders to go visit other lean or improvement-focused organizations, healthcare and otherwise. That really opened our senior leadership's eyes and helped get some buy-in there. Another sort of big learning was, of course, like I mentioned, the model cells. Model cells we thought, and we still do think, are a key way to begin any transformation journey. It's a great place to experiment and learn any new body of knowledge you have, but also specifically here, principles, systems, and tools. We use these model cells to implement a daily management system. I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. We also use these to show what good looks like to the rest of the organization. Of course, share the lessons learned across the enterprise as well. So I'm pretty sure most of you, if not all of you, are aware of the Shingo model, but I'll just quickly go through the model and what our key takeaways were. So this was, again, 2014, 2015. So as always, we start with the results. That's what we all organizations want for. We have our true north, we have our mission and vision, And then to get those results, we use tools. So anytime a specific area is not meeting a specific goal, then we push a tool on it. And those tools get results. They absolutely do. But what we don't necessarily do, or we don't necessarily incorporate those tools as part of our existing systems. So these improvements are, again, one-time events. They're very discrete and sometimes not sustainable, or most of the times not sustainable. So our learning from this was, you still do start with the results, but what this tells us is you take a step back and you understand that there are some guiding principles. We would call these similar to universal laws of nature, like gravity, for example. These aren't opinions, rather. These are truths of business and operational excellence. So you ground yourself and get some understanding on what these guiding principles are. And then you use those principles to either adapt, modify, or create new systems that you have in your organization. And as part of that, understanding those systems, you embed or place these tools within the systems that exist, thereby, again, still getting the results from the tools. So again, the key takeaways are focus on some ideal behaviors that are rooted in these principles. And I'll talk a little bit about this in detail of how we accomplish this. Another key learning was just systems drive culture. You could have these behaviors, you could have these different tools, but it's ultimately the systems that you have in place in the organization that drives the culture. Just to make culture change, you have to understand the systems that you have in place. Another key learning was the role that everybody in the organization played. I don't have it highlighted here, but we did focus on 3 different roles: the leader, the manager, and the frontline, and what does each of these roles play in this model. Yeah, don't push tools, pull them as needed. So based on our learning of just the importance of systems, we built this daily management system, or our version of daily management system. We call it Managing for Daily Improvement System, or the MDI system for short. I don't necessarily want to go through each one of these elements, but of course, as you can see, you'll see that we have elements of status and flow, which is what we call our plan for the day, and how are you accomplishing your plan for the day. Another key part of that is if issues arose, then you track that and you measure that and you analyze that, and then you prioritize them and you problem solve them. Once you problem solve them and go through those PDCA cycles, you either improve your standard work or create that standard work. A huge emphasis was, of course, visual communication boards, a place where you could display all of this to the rest of the department. We talked about scorecards and the importance of daily metrics and strategic metrics. And of course, tying all of this together was the communication part of the huddle, where you discussed all of this with the rest of the department. So the purpose of this sort of system was to create engagement of the team to find ways to solve the different problems there. So like I mentioned, we had 3 different rounds of model cells. The first round with 3 different departments, we engaged senior leadership. We had a lot of buy-in from the senior leadership, and then we engaged the manager and the supervisor of these 3 different areas. We spent about 80 hours in total with them, spread across 10 weeks, 4 days a week, and it was primarily in the classroom. I would say the last couple of weeks, it was more an hour in the classroom and the hour at Gemba. Our second round was pretty similar, still senior leadership, manager, supervisor, 80 hours, where we would teach the different elements of our daily management system. And then the third round, Lennon here, and then the third round would be different, was we engaged the whole frontline team, and that was a huge sort of aha for us. And the other change was also, as you could see here, it was not in the classroom, but it was at Gemba, it was at their workplace. So for the last round of model cells, it was just an hour a day, but the whole time it was where they worked. So they could we would spend maybe 5 or 10 minutes going through a new concept, but the rest of the time they could go practice what they learned and focus on the different elements of the MDI system we just went over. Here are some of the ahas. Again, I don't necessarily want to go through all of these. One of the biggest aha was for the observation unit, and we talked about the importance of the system that in driving culture. So the unit had not opened before they went through this round, and really, so there was no culture to speak of. So they had developed this MDI system before the unit was developed, and when the unit was developed, that was the system that they started with, thereby sort of creating that new culture that we wanted. It really emphasized the importance of how understanding the system is crucial for getting that sort of culture, engaged culture that you would want. Another sort of aha was just how much of just improvement that you can get by enabling the teams to understand and practice some of these tools. The linen department made huge improvements in how they would deliver fresh, clean linen and again, take back the dirty linen. They optimized the workflow quite a bit. And as you can see, we got a lot of results from these models as going through this process as well. We had a few other behaviors developed. We had a principle of the month where really the leadership team, along with our help, put together this sort of flyer you see up on the top right, where we'll be focusing on one principle of the 12 principles that we have from the principles of enterprise excellence. So each of the departments were encouraged to reflect on one principle at their daily huddle, where they'll talk about this principle, they talk about what are some of the behaviors that you would exhibit if you were to follow this principle, and then what you would exhibit if you did not follow this principle, for example. So that was very well encouraged, and people sort of understood that, and we got really good feedback around that. Another behavior was we sort of created a forum. We called it Friday Report Out, but this forum was for just different teams within the organization to share their improvement, either a Kaizen event or maybe it was one of their model cells and they improved something. But it was time for them. They had 30 minutes each to share what they had experimented with their learn, and for us to sort of celebrate their success or just their learning. Another behavior was just creating this accountability board that you see here on the top right now. So this accountability board was in the visual management room of the senior leadership. The different columns are different weeks, and the different rows are the different leaders. So anytime anybody got an action assigned to them, it would go against their name, against that time deadline. We, again, got a lot of feedback from our senior leadership saying this was a great way to keep themselves accountable. Another behavior was the Gemba system. We'll talk about that a little bit more detail. We also created a leadership weekly strategy review. Have a little bit more information about that. We also tried to have a safe time or no meeting zone, basically asking our leadership to allocate this time to not go to meetings, but just allocate this time for the sake of improvement. Or maybe they could have their huddles if it was focused on improvement. Well, some of the learnings, just from our standpoint, was, model skills work. They work really well. It emphasized, again, the importance of systems and how we needed to build some systems. Some of the systems did not exist. The safe time, no meeting zone, that didn't necessarily work just due to a variety of different reasons. One being there were meetings from an enterprise standpoint that they cannot cancel, it was outside of their control, or the leaders were just overwhelmed with work and they couldn't just afford to cancel those meetings or just allocate those times. The importance of leadership standard work, I'm sure everybody here would agree and understand that. Also, how the MDI system, as it was developed originally, could be improved, just focus on behaviors. So, like I said, the sort of next incremental step was understanding and the importance of systems and building those systems. So we engaged IEX, and I think we had around 4 or 5 different workshops, 1 to 2 day workshops, where we pretty much had all of our senior and mid-level leadership attend these, including some of our model cell frontline leadership as well. So they learned the principles of operational excellence, the system-based architecture, but also a huge time spent on understanding what is a system, what are the different components of the system, and how do you build these systems and implement these systems. So we identified a lot of different systems to start with, and then we sort of built those systems. We also leveraged these model cells as a place to experiment the systems that we build. Yeah, so I'll just go through detail. So these are the components of the system, at least how we started out. We started out with the purpose and the scope for the system. Why does the system exist? And then you have the performance outcomes. So again, what are some of the outcomes you want out of the system? We focused on ideal behavior. So these are the behaviors that you would want these different roles to exhibit as part of the system. And then you have the tools, the process, and the triggers for the systems. As you can see, again, it's a swim line map of the different roles having different parts to play in the system and different tools to be called out at different parts of the system. Of course, a huge part of it is also understanding the triggers. What are some of the triggers that you need to be aware of that would call for a specific part in the system? The other 2 components that we didn't work on, but we should have, was the renewal mechanisms, which told us when should you go back and tweak this entire system. And of course, what are some of the process measures of the system as well. So with that sort of learning, we focused on the Gemba visit system. So Gemba is what we would call the place where value is created. And the purpose of designing this system was for the senior leaders to provide focused attention to identified areas in order to, teach, coach, observe, communicate, and celebrate. So we developed a similar process for the Gemba visit system with specific tools being called out and specific triggers as well. Again, you could see most of it was focused on the senior leadership here. And so we created a visual sort of system for them to keep themselves accountable and track what are the different areas that each of the different leaders, and you could see that the different columns are the different areas that the different leaders are accountable for. And you start out a quarter with all red, and as they go through the quarter and as they finish a Gemba, they would turn it green, thereby visually tracking their progress. So this was the weekly strategy review, where it was a weekly sort of discussion with the senior leader and the next level leadership, where they would review the scorecard metrics associated with each of their priority that they had identified, and then it was we had a cadence developed where each of these different divisions that you'd see here would report out to the senior leadership once a week with their scorecard metrics. And of course, if it was red, there would be sort of further analysis around why, and if any countermeasure or action was needed to get back on track. And if it was green, we'll mention the success, celebrate it, and sort of move on. So we had developed this process, and it really became part of the strategy deployment system that came out of the system build activities. So the other sort of learning, and this is sort of where we would say Transformation 2.0 started, was understanding the importance of purpose. So of course we worked with IEX and Mike quite a bit, and we learned that we have the results and we need to understand the guiding principles, but also understanding the purpose is quite important, especially as you get into designing some of these systems. So what we started out again was focusing more on the work systems and how the emphasis needs to be on the work systems. That's where the value is being created at these frontline teams, and we need to go back to the team and enable these frontline teams to develop their own MDI system surrounding their work systems. In our first go-round, we had developed the MDI system within our lean office or our CI team, and we basically trained the team on them. But what we learned was it was way too structured, it was way too complicated, there were a lot of different steps, and again, it was not necessarily applicable to the different teams. But so what we wanted to do this time was really enable the frontline teams to develop their own MDI system or their own version of the MDI system with just a little bit of structure. Again, the structure was just principles and the behaviors. Like I said, again, the huge focus here was the purpose, asking every single team to think about their purpose, think about the purpose for each of the systems that they're developing. Yeah, like I said, the work system are really part of our daily work. That's you have just things like patient encounters, medical care. There's a lot of different tasks, a lot of different tools. We grounded the team on the work systems, and we started out the work systems, which we had not done earlier. So instead of, again, giving them an entire handbook of these are all the components of the MDI system that you are now supposed to do, we just gave them, well, we really worked with them on the purpose of the MDI system and 4 subsystems. So this is another sort of learning and understanding that the MDI system or daily management system really had a few different subsystems, and while we had created systems for these before, they were more separate and not connected. So we wanted to interconnect all of these. So the second go round of all of this transformation 2.0 for us was understanding these subsystems and giving them or working with them on developing the purposes of all of these. So what we did not do was develop specific process steps for all of these systems and then asking these modelators to basically apply those process steps. Rather, we took a step back and said, well, now we want to educate you on the different systems that we think are important, and these are some of the principles. Let's work on the behaviors. But after that, each of the departments would take upon themselves to apply these behaviors into the process steps, and we sort of changed the terminology and said it's really an experiment as opposed to a deployment. I think that, again, helps get some more creative ideas and simplify some of those different things. And I would say this is kind of where the teams are sort of taking this sort of approach and moving ahead. And I think we are getting a lot of more buy-in, and as opposed to being pushed something on them, they have the liberty and they feel a lot more enabled to come up with their own process steps here. We always sort of like this slide here. The things that we see on the top are the results, the behaviors, and the tools. So this iceberg analogy works really well. But you see all those things, but they're based on a lot of different things, like the culture and the purposes that we have underneath that definitely needs to be in place to see the results and the behaviors out there. So I'll finally end with some of my own personal thoughts, just as me being part of that journey and just some of the learnings I've had with these experimentations and meeting and learning from lots of different people. Systems still drive the culture. Giving time to experiment is critical. We have to give the people enough time. Leadership buy-in is not sufficient. We want them to actively own and engage all of the systems that we are deploying and putting in place. Understanding the purpose helps focusing the experimentation. An expert resource like a sensei or an external consultant can be really helpful, and so can assessments. I didn't talk about that, but we also had an external assessment through IEX, and that helped us focus some of our strategies. A transformation roadmap is a really great idea, and just lastly, physicians can be our biggest champions who can take this and run with this if they're engaged correctly. With that, I'll conclude. And again, thank you all for this great opportunity.
Sid, that was great. A lot of profound wisdom there. And when we get to Q&A, I'm sure we'll get some people want to give you kudos, but also here's some more Q&A with that perspective. So what I'm going to do is switch over to something now for something completely different, kind of like a Monty Python introduction here. Many of the organizations that we work with are healthcare or manufacturing, and we have the good fortune of working with an organization in the area of education. So Denise from the Kimberly Area School District is going to finish out our presentation today, and we will get to Q&A after Denise's presentation. Denise, you want to do some introductory remarks?
Yep, thanks, Mike. First of all, I want to thank you for the opportunity to present today. And while I am presenting, I'm presenting on behalf of the district, and there were a lot of individuals involved in the transformation that will be mentioned throughout here. So I'll go ahead and get started. So we are located in Wisconsin. And more specifically between Green Bay and Milwaukee in an area called the Fox Cities. And just a little bit about us or our area, if you're not familiar with the Fox Cities, we're close enough that we can go and catch a Packer game or a Brewer game, and we love both of the Packers and the Brewers. But we also have the Fox Cities, which we have the arts. I think the next one is theater. Click again. That's our Fox our Performing Arts Center, and then that's a picture of the farmers market in downtown Appleton. And then there's a couple more pictures a little closer to where we are. Oh, and you might know about us from the Fox Cities Marathon. And if you just click again, Mike. And some of these are more local to us. We have our rivers and our lakes, so there's a lot of activity surrounding that. And then I think the last picture, that's from Paperfest. And that's, we're very proud of Paperfest here in Kimberly. We are the Papermakers, and we used to be a paper community. So to tell you a little bit about us, the Papermakers, just a little insight here. The WASP is the original paper maker. They make their homes out of paper, and that's why the WASP is our motto there. But a little bit about our district. We already told you we're located in the heart of Valley. Our roots come from small-time Kimberly, which was once a paper mill community. Sadly, we are no longer, but we still have our roots. We have grown tremendously over probably the past 15 years. And so as the area surrounding us boomed, our district really grew. And so we are, and I'll show a later slide on that, but around 5,000 students today. This proud to be a Papermaker right there that you see, that's actually a bumper sticker that you'll see on many vehicles in our area. People are very proud of our school. And just a couple highlights. We are high achieving, low spending. We are approximately 3,000 less in student expense in the state of Wisconsin compared to other districts. So we really are, you get your money, you get your value for your money. We're known for our high quality staff and student-centered programs. We have local supportive public education, and we have been recognized as one of the best school districts in the nation by Newsweek and the Washington Post. Our vision is students will grow as problem solvers to reach their potential in academics, arts, and co-curricular. So this slide really just kind of shows us by the numbers. We are ranked number 9 out of 367 Wisconsin schools for overall experience. Overall looks at more than just academics. It's looking at teacher quality, clubs activities, college prep, things of that nature. We are ranked 38 out of 421 for our academic achievement. That puts us in the top 10%. Our state report cards actually just came out this week, so that's probably going to change slightly to the positive. We're kind of unique in that we serve 5 municipalities. So there's a lot of coordination there with a lot of different entities involved with our school district. We serve 5,190 students. We are a 4-year-old kindergarten through 12th grade school district. We have 9 schools, 1 high school, 1 middle school. Middle school is 7th through 8th grade, 2 intermediates, that's grades 5, 6, 4 elementaries, and then 1 4K center for literacy. And we have approximately 550 plus employees. So what's our current problem? So what we've been working on is why our current system fails 1,100 students. And we define that failure as students that have not reached proficiency in math or reading. Reading is the gateway for life, and math is the gateway for college. And so it's very important to us that we stop failing these students and move forward and find out what we can do. So with that, from our current state to really where we want to be, this particular slide, our superintendent, it was part of his A3 probably maybe almost 10 years ago now. So we're making movement towards this, but it gives you an overall picture of where we're headed. We want to move from a district-led change to really a process change at all levels of our leadership. We're moving from staff development themes to self-directed employee improvement. We are starting to see that where instead of staff development being driven from the assistant superintendent's office, which is how we used to operate, we're starting to now see pull at the building levels from our teachers, and then our principals respond in turn. We're trying to move from yearly goals to more frequent goal review, 90-day report outs. That's part of the strategic work that I'm involved in, is really trying to get to quicker cycles of understanding and adjusting the work. District goals, from very wide district goals to really driving down those goals from the district down to the building, down to the teacher, and then down to the student. Evaluation as a requirement, and then evaluation for professional growth. We're moving from solution-based thinking to a continuous improvement mindset, and that definitely takes time, but we're slowly moving towards that. We're trying to move from teachers teach curriculum to teachers really are teaching based on student need and really watching to see what each of those students in their classroom needs, and then teaches according to that. And then a couple other ones on here. We're moving from principals identify teacher improvement to teachers analyze skills, develop goals, and seek resources to improve. We're moving from teachers assign student work to we really want to get to a place where students are analyzing their skills, they're developing the goals, they're pulling for the learning. A lot of our model cell work is really focused on having the student drive their learning. And then the last 3 here, assessment of rote knowledge to problem solvers. Teachers teach assigned students to they collaborate to meet all student needs, and teachers lack time for student instruction to teacher instructional time is maximized for student engagement. So then big picture wise, this just kind of gives you, we're moving from a curriculum drives instruction to really our student need is driving the instruction, where student is passive recipient to the student is really the active participant. Teacher owns the learning to student owns the learning, and teacher problem solve for the student to student problem solves for him, herself, and pulls for what he, she needs. And I think what you can see from this slide is we really are trying to move on that right side where the student is the driver here in CI where the customer is really driving the change. So why did we look into continuous improvement? So again, probably about 10 years back, I have you put up the I see dead people part, Mike. About 10 years back, our superintendent, Bob Mayfield, did not believe the traditional educational model would get the improvement we needed. And something you can hear Bob say around here is that he sees dead people. And what he means by that is those 1,100 students that were failing, when he would go out to the classrooms, he would see those students and go, we failed them in second grade and we pass them on to third grade, and we fail them in third grade and we pass them on to fourth grade. They're our walking dead. And they'd become, in a way, a acceptable loss. And I think you see that in school districts. If they were getting 80% proficiency, that still means you're failing 20% of your population, and it's not an acceptable loss. And we are very driven to do something about that, because that's someone's child. And that's really at the heart of what we're trying to do, is make sure each of our students can achieve their potential. And so that was really, Bob was the driving force behind that. He studied a local hospital that UCI practices that was led by John Toussaint. Bob then brought CI to Kimberly schools, and our journey began. And I should, since you have the picture of Bob up, put a shout out to him, who I think he's listening, but Bob just recently found out that he got the great honor of Superintendent of the Year for the state of Wisconsin. So we're pretty proud of that. So our journeys is very similar to what I've heard from all the other presentations, where I won't go through all the detail, but we really started in research. But as we started to bring continuous improvement to our district, it was a mixture of lean tools and culture was probably those two roads that we were in. And the lean tools in 2013-14, you can see, I kind of noted there that we had Lean 101 class, rapid improvement events, huddles. We were doing a bunch of things that we saw Theta Care or other places do. And in some cases, we got fast results. But just like others have experienced, sustaining that didn't happen, and really the organization accepting that wasn't happening. And so we continued the journey of 14-15 was really an alignment year. We were still somewhat into tools with X Matrix. It was a lot of A3 that year and learning the A3 tool. But then in 15-16, that was the year that we started to uncover Shingo, and actually met Jake Reimer from IEX, and that really kind of transformed our journey. I remember at the time when we discovered that, we're like, this really feels right. This fits where we want to head and what we're doing. Prior to that, we knew something wasn't right, but we didn't know what it was, and we saw results, but we weren't necessarily getting them the way we wanted to. And so this really just fit for our organization and made sense to us that the principles should drive the behaviors, which will eventually drive your results. So where we are today is we are working on transforming our culture to create the condition where students reach their potential through problem solving. And we look at our culture in 4 circles there. We're working on a culture focused on the student, and we call that one give students what they need when they need it. We work on a culture of respect and humility, and our phrase there is taking care of one another. And culture of organizational improvement. That's where we're trying to get the continuous improvement mindset. And our culture of personal improvement is our learning for theirs. And that is our teachers, everyone is learning for the students. So whatever the student's gap is, we're learning what that student needs to close that gap. So then looking at the systems, this is just a different view of the slide you put up at the very beginning. Mike, this is just how we're trying to get there. So there's other systems within here, but these are the main ones we've been working on. At the macro system, it's really been culture and vision, and I would say that has really been led by our superintendent, by Bob. At the organizational level, probably in more recent years, we've been really working on the strategic system and helping us align. That's within my umbrella. The leadership system, led by our assistant superintendent, Holly, she's really been working on the principalship and really changing the behaviors of the principals so that they can enable those teachers to do the good work with the students. So then our improvement teams probably looks a little bit different here than other organizations. We don't necessarily have this big CI team. It really is done through our principals. Our principals are in charge of their buildings, and so they're the ones that are really developing the teachers, that problem-solving staff, to go and work with our students. And then we have our model learning areas. Right now we have 3 schools that are our learning areas. We started with our Mapleview Intermediate, run by John Schultz, who is now our Director of Curriculum, or I should say, sorry, Director of Student Improvement. And then we spread it to our other intermediate school, Woodland, and then we spread that to our middle school, J.R. Garrett's. And this year, they're working on student strategies and mindset. And then that just shows you when I mentioned John, who came from our model cells, he really helps connect those 3 tiers there in his role as Director of Student Improvement. So then, this is the IEX model that we use, and I won't go through it in detail other than to say what it's really done is help us define the key behaviors we're looking for in the organization to get whatever those very high level results are we're looking for. And so how we're currently using this is we have a district strategic plan that's the high level for the entire organization. Here are the high level behaviors we want to see. Then if you go to the next slide, we drill down further into what we call our principal strategic plan, where we're drilling into those behaviors more. If you can go back, Mike, we drill down into those behaviors more, and you can't see them, but we take them from a high level behavior to really saying, what is the behavior we're looking for from the student? And what is the behavior we're looking for from the teacher? And so we have identified some ideal behaviors we want from our teachers and our students. And then through that, we lay out what it is, what's the targeted end of year outcome. And then this just gives you an idea of how, with the work system in the middle, how we are talking about this to our principals. So we talk about that we're really aligning to what we call our WHO, and our WHO lovingly is the 1,100 students that I mentioned before. We call them our WHO because we spent a year identifying who are these kids, so they're called the WHO. We enable this, our work system, our student learning system is really enabled through the principalship. And then what we're working on improving is with student reflection last year, students could ID their gap and then reflect on that. And then this year it's moved into, if you do one more click, Mike. Now we're going one step further into that, going, okay, once a student IDs their gap, how are they going to close it? So now students can start looking at what strategies they might have to close that gap. And we also have student mindset there, because the student definitely needs to have a learning mindset in order to close those gaps, a growth mindset. So what are we learning? We've been learning that culture results need to be addressed at the same time. It isn't a either or, it is a both. with every year, we've been getting clearer on our vision and outcomes, and we have seen our alignment increase as we get clear on where we're headed. It is important to create flow of value that is triggered by our student, and we've learned to pay attention to pull and to stop pushing. So we try very hard at the leadership level not to push tools on staff, not to push this on them, but wait for the pull, and we try also to create pull. And then we're learning that continuous improvement should continuously expose the why. Sometimes we get very caught up in the work and we're busy doing, but we need to stop and ask ourselves why, to the purpose, to what end. And so things we're still struggling with, visual management, I would say, continues to be a struggle for us, and really using it effectively so it's not being used as a tracker, but rather as something that can help inform us when we need to make a change, when we need to adjust. We've been trying to move closer to rapid improvement cycles, 2 to 4 week study adjust cycles. That's really important for us being a school, because for our students, we can't wait. If we wait for these improvement cycles to happen, another year has gone by and we failed them. And so these cycles need to happen much more rapidly. And then I think something many of us struggle with is just, how do you change an entire organization's mindset through your process and systems? And we continue to work through that and struggle and make gains in other areas.
Okay,
that's it.
I think that's your last slide, Denise. I appreciate that.
That is.
Okay, I'm going to open the phones if people want to ask any questions of either of the presenters, and you can always use the chat function here. Looks like there was a question that was back in the timeline with Sid. Sid, you're still there, right?
Yes, I am.
A question, why did the frontline staff get the least training time? Maybe that was one of your earlier iterations.
It was, I would say, our first round of model cells, yeah, we just didn't necessarily understand or realize the importance of engaging the frontline staff right away. Because again, we were asking for a huge commitment, and we know that the frontline staff, the providers, and the nursing staff and the others, they are the ones adding value to the patient. So it would have meant that we would have to reduce the schedules, or maybe reduce the number of visits that the patients can see. So we sort of really didn't truly understand the value of it. So we chose not to, and just have the leaders and the department leaders, and of course the other leadership involved in the first round of model cells. But what we realized was we should have done that, and that's why one of our learnings, and my personal learning, was we have to give some time to experiment and learn. So what we did do was block off the schedules of the providers for the first 30 minutes of the day, and we started the day earlier so we could engage all of them.
Great, thanks. There's a comment here from someone. Tanya says that as a senior CI consultant, but also a school board member, she's excited to see the work they're doing. So kudos there. Fozzie has a question about, do you have numbers and results to share from your cell models? I guess that's for either presenter.
I guess from Kimberly Schools, something we were very excited about this year that John Schultz, our Director of Student Improvement, put together, sits in our CI room, is we can see the growth. It's a metric that comes when we put together our report cards for the state of Wisconsin. And without getting in a lot of detail, it shows each student, it measures if they grew from like grade, say 3rd grade to 4th grade. And what we're seeing is in our 2 intermediate model cells, we're seeing much higher growth scores and growth movement than in our other areas.
Okay, great. Thanks. So it sounds like if people have curiosity about, say, before and after results, those are available, and people can certainly interact after the webinar on that. And I can be a conduit for that or put people in contact with our presenters. Are there any other questions for anyone on the call today? Well, since we're at the end of the hour, again, I want to thank our presenters and just want to briefly go through some items as far as what happens next. So we've got a webinar that was going to be scheduled in May on frontline leader standard work. Didier Rubino is working with us to get that rescheduled. In next month, a webinar presented by Angie Swenson and Dirk Van Rossum, designed to be an interactive webinar. We've called it the Lessons of a Failed Sensei, but kind of like lessons of learned along the path as far as advising leaders and organizations about how this works. So looking forward to that. Ken Eakin, a friend and colleague, just published a book that's available now. You can get it through Amazon. He's going to do a webinar for us on office lean in January. So looking forward to that. And I'll have more to say about Ken's book because I'm right in the middle of reading it, find it to be very helpful, and I think others will as well. A friend and colleague, Kevin McNamara, has done at least one webinar for us, perhaps two, and he's the CEO at Tidy Products, and he's going to give an update on his experiments in leader standard work, what he calls a personal management system. And so that's in February, and you can find the information at the bit.ly link there. And friend Jason Schulist, who runs a group called the Generative Local Communities Institute, is going to do a presentation in April on the concept of generativity using adaptive problem solving on some of those thorny community problems. And I presented at his annual presentation, Skills Fest, learned a lot. Did it last year as well, so he's going to provide some information on what that is all about, and you can find the information at that bit.ly link, so that'll be in April. And some other things that are in the works that we're going to be working on for 2020. Continue to do the principle of the month. This was a commitment to take one of the principles per month and then devote a reflection both on LinkedIn as well as on our website, one per week on these reflections on the principles. So you can see over the months, you can get the bit.ly links to each of these, or you can just go to the website and track along. Anyone who wants access to some thinking or a way to build some reflection into their organization, you can go to any of these links and get some perspective or some ideas, and of course share your perspective and ideas on how these principles make sense. And the most recent one in November, Embracing Scientific Thinking, we have 2 weeks down on that, and then we'll finish up November, and then we'll wrap it up in December. And then next year we'll do something different, probably again related to principles and reflections. Just a final invitation, if you or anyone in your organization wants to share a story or has an idea about a story or concept you'd like to talk about, this is one forum to do that. You can contact me and we'll get something set up. So again, I want to thank our presenters for the great presentation today, taking the time to put it together, and the recording for this will be available for everyone that participated today, and you can also forward it on to others that weren't able to participate that they might benefit as well. So thanks again. I hope everyone has a good day. Thanks.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
Bye-bye.